I am Park Jom-deok, and I am 77 years old. I was born in 1948, and my birthday is June 6th. When I was young, my grandmother always said, "Your father did nothing wrong." A neighborhood brother called him out and he went, just like that. That's all she would say. She never said anything else. Then the next morning, a telegram arrived saying he had died. He was not the only one who died that evening. Munbawi, which is now called Yonggie Mountain, was where my grandmother said, went to Munbawi. They were shot and killed. People were too scared to bury the dead even though they found the bodies. As I was young, I didn't ask clearly, but I was told that my father was adopted and had two mothers. My grandfather's older brother passed away early, so his wife, who didn't have a son, adopted my father. Then my father passed away early as well, and my grandmother developed an illness from the grief. So she was always smoking, unable to sleep, and whenever she thought of my father, she would be overwhelmed by grief. She'd say to us, "Don't bring it up," and we didn't ask her anything. That's how we lived our lives. Speaking of how we grew up as children, there would be no end to it. Back then, children without parents probably all grew up the same way. We took it for granted that we grew up like that. As I'm older, after getting married and having children, my father's early death makes me so sad. I never even got to see my father's face. And my mother remarried and left. Looking back at that age, how could such young women have lived alone? Moreover, I was not a son but a daughter. I guess that's why the elders decided to send my mother off to remarry. My mother remarried and left, so I was raised in my grandmother's home, under her care. My grandmother raised me, carrying me on her back. One day, my mother came to see me, but I must have been too young and naive. And I guess I'd never called anyone mom. So when someone said to me, "Your mom came to see you," I replied, "I don't have a mom. How could I have a mom?" And then I ran away. Looking back now, I think, oh my, how heartbroken my mother must have been when I said those words. That thought crosses my mind. In the past, the most heartbreaking thing was growing up without parents. At school, kids would talk about eating special meals for their birthdays. I didn't even know what a birthday was, let alone birthday meals. Growing up without parents, I never got to call anyone mom or dad. When other kids called out to their parents mom or dad, I would wonder, what does that even mean? That's how sorrowfully I grew up. At that time, everyone who didn't have parents must have grown up feeling sorrowful. I wasn't the only one. I believe everyone grew up like that. That's just how life was when we were growing up. We only knew the fields and worked all the time. Every day we dug with hoes and hand hoes, ate our meals, and went right back to work. We couldn't go to school and we just lived like that. Back then, life was so harsh. If my father had been alive, at least I could have seen his face. I wish I had just one photo of him. How come there aren't any photos? Surely there must have been wedding photos, but there are no pictures of my mother or my father. Later on, I somehow managed to find and saw a photo of my mother. But since there's no photo of my father, I couldn't see his face. Even if he appeared in my dreams and said, "I am your father," I wouldn't recognize him because I don't know his face. In the afterlife, if he were to say, "I am your father," hold my hand just once and embrace me, that would be wonderful. My greatest wish is to see my father. Think about those who died unjustly. It's truly heartbreaking and leaves a deep resentment and lingering sorrow. If you ask me what is the most heartbreaking, it's dying so young, unfairly having done nothing wrong. That is the most unjust and truly heartbreaking. When I was young, people would say, "Guransil mass ancestral rites have come around again." A mass ancestral rite refers to performing memorial services for the late ancestors who died on the same day. Parents often said in dialect, "Mass ancestral rites have come around." Back then, they said a lot of people had passed away. I didn't see it with my own eyes, so I don't know for sure. But the adults said that an enormous number of people died. They said many people passed away at Munbawi. It wasn't just people from Guransil who died there. It seems people from other places were also brought to kill. That must be why so many people were killed. My grandmother said my father had been very kind and gentle. And even though he'd been young, he'd been incredibly good-hearted. After he passed away, both of my grandmothers were overwhelmed by grief, from which they developed illnesses. That's why I never asked them about anything. They would always say, "Your mother and father were kind and dependable, and they were good people." They would always say that. My grandmother always thought of my father as a kind person. After he passed away, she avoided mentioning my father, lest she should unknowingly say anything negative about him. When I was young, I never really thought about my father or mother. I was always busy, so I couldn't think about them much. But when did they come to mind? It was when I joined the Bereaved Family Association and shared how my father passed away. Saying that I was one of the bereaved made me cry. They put up a monument at the Palma Gymnasium. Whenever I go there, tears come to my eyes. My father was so young. At his age now, he should have been in school. But he passed away after having me, leaving nothing behind. What could he have known or accomplished at that age? No matter what, they were my parents. So I wish I had at least one photo of them to look at. As I grow older, I miss my parents even more. And I wish I could see their faces. I've seen my mother, but I never got to see my father. I wonder what my father looked like. Did he look like my uncle or like my aunt? Did my father look like them? Thinking about that brings even more tears to my eyes because I miss them. If my father had lived, he would be 100 years old this year. I still think about it and say to myself, he would be 100 years old if he was still alive.